All right, welcome along to the RT Soccer Podcast. I'm Raf Giallo alongside Jim McMahon of RT Sport Online. And we've also got Conan Byrne with us for this week's episode. We're going to be joined by journalist David Sneyd a little bit later on when we're going to talk about the League of Ireland clubs in Europe. Some very good results in most cases. Unfortunately for Sligo, it looks like their journey in the Europa Conference League is coming to an end. And then chief football writer of The Independent, Miguel Delaney, is going to join us a lot later on to talk about the Premier League weekend. And that is where we're going to start, Jim. I think just in terms of the Irish interest in general. Obviously, we're back to the concepts of Super Sundays and all this happening now. I mean, did that kind of capture your own attention?
Oh, it did. Yeah, I mean, a bit earlier than expected. I think this is the earliest start that the Premier League has ever had. I think I checked it out there. I think the Premier League did start on the 7th of August in 1999. So I just wanted to check when was the earliest start. Started on Friday night, obviously, with Arsenal having a good win over Crystal Palace 2-0, and then Liverpool, the team that most people expect will either finish first or second this year, struggle somewhat and be somewhat off the pace against Fulham, who more than deserved their draw on Saturday. And then in the afternoon, then to get to the Irish angle, in the afternoon, then we had Tottenham, the team that most people expect will be the best of the rest from after the top two. But I actually think Tottenham might even do a little bit better than that. But they beat Southampton 4-1, and it was somewhat of a blessing in disguise, even though he really wasn't really at fault at all for the goals. Gavin Bazunu had 4 put past him on Saturday, so it was a bit of a toughish afternoon at the office for Southampton. Again, a club as well that some people are tipping could find the going a bit tough this year in the league. And then the other, I suppose, interest for Irish people on Irish fans on Saturday was Nathan Collins playing for Wolves, but unfortunately they too lost out on the opening afternoon. So so a bit of an up and down weekend so far, but an earlier than expected start probably maybe has caught some people a little off guard. But because of the World Cup coming in December, that's the reason why. So it's an awful long way to go between now and the 28th of May next year.
Yeah, certainly. But Conan, maybe on the first bits of Irish interest, obviously in the Arsenal Crystal Palace game, there weren't any Irish eligible players really involved in that. But the following day, obviously, there was a lot of focus on Liverpool, and then Shane Duffy made a very, very late cameo. So obviously going on loan from Brighton to Fulham. What did you make of his move there? I mean, I think there was always a sense that he possibly couldn't be sent out on loan by Brighton. And obviously Fulham as a promoted club, you think over the season he might actually get a good few minutes compared to his chances at Brighton, where they have a very established centre-back pairing.
Yeah, with Fulham, I was very impressed with their back line yesterday. I think they marshalled it very, very well. There was plenty of communication between defence and midfield in terms of the press that was going on. They didn't allow Liverpool on the ball at all for long periods of the game. It's as if when they took the lead, they kind of sat back a little bit, trying to hold on to the lead from a Fulham point of view, instead of keep doing what they were doing. Mitrovic was an absolute handful. It was absolutely excellent. But as I said, with Shane Duffy, I think he was brought on probably just to make sure that Liverpool didn't get that third goal. And then Jordan Henderson hits a 30-yard shot from outside the box as soon as he comes on and nearly wins it for Liverpool. So wouldn't have been the best debut for Shane Duffy. But yeah, I was impressed with as I said, Anderson was very good at the back for Fulham. So I don't know whether he'll get in ahead of him. He plays out from the back really, really well. Very confident on the ball. Very good man marker too. So yeah, I think it'll take time for him to get some minutes in that Fulham team. Given the way that they started the game, I'm sure the manager will want to give his side some time. But yeah, it was a bit of it's a good move for him in the sense that he's gone to a Premier Division club, Raf. It's not a case that he's dropping down a division, like other players that we'll probably talk about later on. That he's still playing at the highest level, and just hopefully that he'll be able to get some minutes and kick on with Fulham.
Yeah, and one of the other bits of Irish interest, of course, is one of the games you were watching, which was, as Jim outlined there, the Spurs Southampton game, of course, for Spurs, and Matt Doherty, who's obviously part of that squad, hopefully won't have the same injury issues he had last season. They went on 1-4-1 and kind of underlined their credentials, but for Southampton, Gavin Bazunu didn't have a bad game by all accounts. It was more, and there was, and I saw all the goals, obviously I saw the highlights, and we couldn't really do anything about any of them. But he's going to have his work cut out this season because Southampton clearly can't defend.
No, and even some of the players are putting it in their own net as well. Which was shocking defended by Salisu, should I say? But yeah, I was very impressed with Bazunu, even though he conceded the 4 goals. He looked very assured. Again, communicated with his back four. You could see him pointing and shouting at various times. Couldn't do nothing about the goals. But when you're coming up against Kulusevski and Son, Kane, you're not going to come up against harder opposition and attacking players than that. So I think we'll judge him over the next couple of weeks when perhaps when he makes a couple of world-class saves and stop. You can't. I don't think you can fault him, and I don't think Hessenthal will fault him over the performance on Saturday because he could do nothing about the goals. With Matt Doherty, obviously he hasn't. He's been injured over the last number of months. And he made a cameo towards the end of the game, but with Emerson Royal, I think. And if you're going to compare the two players, I think Matt Doherty will be head and shoulders above Emerson Royal. I didn't think he had a great game, even though they won 4-1. And with Conte obviously playing Matt Doherty last year and doing really, really well in that team when they went on that fantastic run towards the end of last season, and Matt Doherty was part of that, I'd suspect Doherty will be getting a lot of game time. That's unless Jed Spence does particularly well in training and in some of his cameo roles. But no, I expect Doherty to nail down that right wing back position for Spurs going forward.
Yeah, and I think David Sneyd has joined us now. How are you keeping?
Morning. Like Paul's goals, late run into the box.
Yeah, no, you didn't have to fly in through Shannon or anything and then just have a statement prepared for us, did you?
No. Although in fairness, if needs be, I was going to go on to the lads and Shkupi just to kind of get a template.
Yeah, they have a perfect one. Yeah, we were just talking before we get on to the League of Ireland clubs in Europe. We're just talking through the Irish side of the Premier League in terms of and Championship, etc., in terms of players involved. And we were just talking about Bazunu there, but also Nathan Collins making his competitive Wolves debut as well, which in a match I was watching when they lost to Leeds. Like, it's a great I suppose it's a great endorsement for him that straight away Bruno Lage kind of put him into the starting 11, and Conor Cody, the long-time captain, who seems to be on his way to Everton anyway, was sort of dropped, and they've gone to a back four. So there's a lot of trust in him being put, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of them where, like, even during pre-season, like, a lot of talk was, well, how is it actually going to work? How is the defence going to shape up? It seemed as if, looking at from the outside, it seemed as if Cody was the one who, right, he's the captain, he's the linchpin, and everything kind of revolves around him. But you kind of wonder, and things, obviously, a lot of things can play out in the background a little bit. You wonder, did they kind of go in hard for Nathan Collins now because they kind of realised that there was a chance Cody was going to be gone and they needed someone in there? Like, that's kind of maybe just a sense that I'm beginning to get a little bit now. I think they kind of realised something was brewing with Conor Cody, because even in pre-season, when a couple of their games, they kind of fluctuated between different formations, but also personnel, rather than you would think if you're trying to embed a new player, or it was getting me in quickly, but he was kind of not so much in and out, but they were mixing and matching. And I kind of got the sense now that maybe, as tends to be the case, stuff can be happening behind the scenes, and it's now coming to a head that Cody is leaving. But I would also imagine that they've kind of realised what they have in Nathan Collins as a player. Like, obviously the due diligence would have been getting done, and you're not going to be a captain of a side like Stoke in a championship at 18 years of age if you haven't got something about you. And then just also I'd say what could have stood to him a little bit from last year was just how patient he was, in terms of, like, there was no sign of him getting antsy or traumatized out of pram when he wasn't able to dislodge Burnley's kind of me and Tarkovsky. Like, he kind of was willing to bide his time a little bit and kind of just keep on working away. And even when Burnley were struggling, like, there was no ever sense that he was being a disruptive presence or anything like that. And yeah, obviously then the end of the season that he had with Ireland, clearly that would have obviously then come to the fore for people's thinking, because obviously Leicester City then stepped up their interest in him. And again, maybe that was perhaps why Wolves had to. Maybe they had to then say, well, do you know what, we can't miss out on a target when they know that he was primed for possibly for somewhere else as well. So yeah, it's shaping up now with Cody leaving that it's going to be even more game time for him, and he is going to have to hit the ground running. Disappointing result, especially when you've taken the lead at the weekend. But it's going to be another big season. But like, you kind of sense with him that he can take it on, that he rises to these challenges, and you just hope that there's going to be difficult moments. He's settling into a new club. You just hope that he can meet it head on, as he has pretty much every other challenge since he's gone to England.
Yeah, and he was decent over the 90 minutes. I don't think, pretty much like Gavin Bazunu, I don't think any of the goals really were, he wasn't exactly involved or at fault for any of them. But we'll come back to the Premier League in more detail with Miguel Delaney a little bit later on. But down in the Championship, of course, plenty of Irish goals down there. Shane Long, James McLean, Sammy Smodzic and Jimmy Dunn also all on target for their clubs. And then also Jason Knight in League One. This is an interesting one, David. Like, I think we would have thought by now he would have left Derby County, and then I was just looking at the lineup against Charlton. He's there at right back.
I know. It's like Irish fans just want to see him get a move because they can see the potential that's in there. If you go back to that, like the last game, the Luxembourg game away from home, when he came off the bench and just made such an impact. But obviously that was at a point in the time with Derby where, even look at last season, maybe a victim of his own versatility, where he wasn't playing all the time. He actually got dropped out of the team for a little bit just because he had been playing so much. Like, I think the timing is so important in football in terms of transfers, and I know Newcastle were kind of looking in and around even before, say, the takeover there. And I don't think that could be something that maybe kind of looked at again, but I just think that ship might have sailed. I think, I know Patrick Vieira and Crystal Palace were assessing that as well. That was one that was being looked at, but again, that just seems to have gone quiet. But he still has time on his side, but what's gone on with Derby and the state they're in now, after obviously the new owners and all the rest of it, and for his own sense of progress, you hope he gets a move. But then at the same time, he can't be making one for the sake of it just to get back up to the Championship. It is about picking the right move for him, where he's going to be playing regularly and testing himself and being able to improve. But it is a big couple of weeks for him, I think, just in terms of playing. But then he's also, if you're looking at it, and if he's looking at it from the point of view of, he has to look at it from the point of view of what's best for his career, not just what's best in the short term in terms of Ireland. Like, if he plays for Derby County over the next few weeks, he knows he's not going to lose his place in the Ireland squad. Stephen Kenny has shown where if there's lads who are playing at that level who he believes are capable of playing higher and have that potential, then he'll do it. And he's obviously been a key part of Stephen Kenny's squad. So if the right move doesn't come about for him, I don't think he should be just saying, I have to get out of Derby because it's in League One and it's a club going through a lot of struggles, because making the right move could maybe be detrimental to him as well. He has to maybe just make sure that what happens next is basically going to suit him, because again, like Stephen Kenny spoke about this last week when he was in Tullamore, when he spoke to the media last week, and he said, like, leaving the last Ireland camp, he felt that there was a move imminent for Jason Knight. So something has obviously happened there where, again, as is the way in football, there can be moving plates and things don't go smoothly, but a move did seem to be imminent and it hasn't happened. But now it just has to be the right one, not going for the sake of it, because that could be more detrimental for him.
Yeah, and Conan, in terms of the level that you feel, if he does make the move, as David says there, and where he potentially lands, I mean, obviously he's been linked with sort of mid to lower Premier League clubs, but also he's played in the Championship before. He knows that level, and you would imagine he's more than good enough to be up in the kind of higher end of the Championship. There was a link with Birmingham City a bit lower down the end, just I think as a John Eustace. But where do you think right now in his career, in terms of making sure he gets game time, but also that he's playing at a level that does match his potential, where do you feel more or less it'd be a good landing ground would be for him?
I think he needs to start playing this right position. I don't know if many people are going to be watching him playing at right back. And they'd be interested to know why he's playing at right back and why he isn't playing in his natural position in central midfield. He reminds me of I can understand why Patrick Vieira was after him, because he kind of reminds me a bit like Conor Gallagher, the way he gets around the pitch and his energy and work rate. But yeah, look, with Jason, there's not many Premier Division clubs that might look down on at League One with a possibility of taking them from League One and starting them in the Premier League. That said, he did it fantastically well in the Championship last year. Brilliant for Ireland, as David said there. His game against the game when he came on against Luxembourg, he completely changed it. He was magnificent, and we all know his potential. But I think his next move will probably be a little stepping stone, a little bit like Josh Cullen. The way I think Josh Cullen has done really, really well at Burnley, but that's not his level. I think we all can agree that he's a Premier Division player. And I think Jason Knight may have to do the same. Go back up into the Championship, get a season or two under his belt, and then move on again. Because if you're asking a manager to take in a Premier Division manager to take in a player from League One, albeit he's just gone there. No signings nobody has taken the plunge as yet. I don't think he's going to go straight into a starting 11 in the Premier League. So yeah, I think a stepping stone is probably the right course of action for Jason Knight now. Nail down his central midfield position in that team, and then as hopefully with like Josh Cullen, then get a bigger move out of that.
Yeah, and then the other one before we talk about the League of Ireland clubs in Europe, it is Jamie McGrath going on loan to Dundee United. Obviously, he knows Scottish football well, having spent his time at St Mirren doing really well before getting his move to Wigan in League One. And they obviously got promoted, but he never really got game time when he was there. And then obviously they moved him on. It's a curious situation, Conan.
Yeah, Jamie McGrath is the type of player that you'd like to see in the continent. Just his ability on the ball, and it's a bit like Jack Byrne in the sense that when you go down the leagues in England, it's cutthroat. You don't get a second on the ball. Pitches aren't as good either. And with Jamie, he just didn't get the opportunity, if I'm being completely honest, Raf. And now he's gone back up to Scotland, came off the bench there in their game against AZ Alkmaar. And did a magnificent turn for I think it was Stevenson for the goal to beat them 1-0. Magnificent result for Scottish football, considering the Motherwell scenario with Sligo Rovers. He started yesterday, albeit they were defeated 1-0 to Livingston, but he got the 90 minutes under his belt, and I think that's what he needs. He needs game time. But he's the type of player that can change a game in an instant. He's absolutely magnificent. I saw Dundee United's reel. When they signed him, they showed a little clips of what Jamie McGrath was like. And I remember they showed him a game against Dundalk a couple of years ago when he was only 19. And I think that was the reason why Stephen Kenny signed him. He went by about 4 or 5 players. And instead of shooting when he went by all those players, he laid it off to Aaron Green, who missed the target. But yeah, Jamie McGrath has all the potential in the world. Absolutely fantastic player. Brilliant off the pitch. Great determination. Has his Ireland caps. Probably should feel that he should be still in the squad and getting more. But he needs to be playing at the right level, and hopefully he can find that now with Dundee United and kick on from there.
Yeah, I was just actually kind of curious, actually, David. Like, so you haven't spoken to Jim Goodwin a few months ago. Obviously, he really rates McGrath, and I think he was interested in bringing him to Aberdeen. But obviously, McGrath's decided to go down the Dundee United road.
Yeah, like it was again. It's a bit of a not so much a strange one, but just how the move to Wigan has just totally flopped for him in the sense that he's barely got a kick. You know, I know obviously when he arrived at Wigan, they were in the middle of a promotion push, but like it just seems very strange that he hasn't even been given an opportunity. And it was something that even Stephen Kenny said last week, where it was put to him that, you know, he hasn't really kicked on, and Stephen, being Stephen, the way he responded was, well, it's not a case he hasn't kicked on, it's just he hasn't kicked the ball, you know. But that's the truth of it, because I remember obviously when he went over to Scotland, from seeing him play in the League of Ireland, and like what Colin says, like you looked at him and you're like, this fella has so much ability, he's like flair, but he's added so much more to his game. And maybe he always had it when he was at the League of Ireland. Clearly he did in terms of the capability, but didn't quite need it. But just being there for his Ireland full debut against Portugal and Faro, and just seeing just how clever he is defensively and how much ground he can cover and just how he gets about the place. I'll be honest, I didn't think that he had that element to his game. I thought that might be something that could actually hold him back, in terms of maybe managers might see him as a bit of a luxury almost, that he has all the skills and all the rest, but can't quite do the rest of it. But like when you speak to managers, no, it's not so much the opposite, but he is the package, the full package, and that you would have been tailor-made, you would say, to be in a side going for promotion in League One. And like what Conan says as well, like, this isn't a lad who's going to go into a dressing room and be a disruption. Like, he's not going to be getting left out because he's a bad egg. At least the total opposite. You know what I mean? I'm sure next time you speak to Gary Rogers on the podcast, he'll tell you about all the car journeys he would have shared with him and what a down-to-earth lad he is, you know, and like, he really is. And I think just playing games, like we mentioned there, Josh Cullen earlier, and like, I spoke to Josh Cullen last week, and I just said it to him, I was like, this must be the most confident you feel in your career. And he literally just said it's about playing football. It's just about playing games and feeling confident in your body and what you know you can, literally stuff like how far you can push yourself, what you can play through and what you can do, and realise what you're capable of. And I think that's what Jamie McGrath needs now. I think he just needed to go, and he knows now. You might think, oh, why is he going to Dundee? Like, maybe there could have been that move to go to somewhere else, but I think he just needed to go somewhere in the short term and just play football again and get games and get minutes, because no matter how good of a lad he is, his confidence must have taken an absolute battering over the last few months from being in a position where he was that Jason Knight figure, in terms of where you look at Jason Knight in the Ireland squad, you think he fits into that system with Stephen Kenny, with, say, Troy Parrott, and if it's a Michael Obafemi leading the line. Like, Jamie McGrath was the one who in that system was perfect in terms of being able to get forward, get back, be that extra man in midfield and still provide attack. And yet, since like this year, he gets dropped. Stephen Kenny he just dropped him because he wasn't playing in the March games, didn't play again, and is out of the picture in June. And it just shows you, like, momentum is so important, and you just have to try and get it back and get games again and get that rhythm going, because there's a real good player there. And again, with our Ireland hat on, like, we need someone like Jamie McGrath to be playing, because he's going to be such a crucial figure for that squad. He just offers so many different variables in that team. Like,
yeah, we'll see how he gets on. Now, we're going to talk about the League of Ireland clubs in Europe. And Jim, I suppose, largely before we get into detail on it, it's kind of a story of largely pretty good on the pitch in terms of results. And Pat's obviously pulling off one of the more famous away victories on the road for a League of Ireland club, and then of course Shamrock Rovers getting a good home win and one foot hopefully in the group stages of the Europa Conference League, and then I think on top of it as well, travel disruption being sort of like another element that was sort of like a subplot before and after some of those games.
That's right. We had Shkupi probably weren't aware of the fact that, in spite of Ireland as a country has come on, and that there is a very good road from Shannon up to Dublin, and you can get there in jig time. And then we had Pats not able to get back after their brilliant display, not able to get back to Dublin until Sunday morning, and that forced the match with Shelbourne not to go ahead, and Shells weren't happy about that, because the match was originally due to take place on Friday. So not quite a planes, trains and automobile saga, but certainly much to talk about stuff off the pitch, but certainly on it. I think St. Pat's result is probably one of the great outcomes of for a side for a League of Ireland side in European competition over the past couple of years. And it would be a great shame now if they can seal the deal, even though it will be tough, that goes without saying, on Thursday night. And I think for Shamrock Rovers to get that third goal late on, and a cracking goal it was, it just gives them that little bit of an extra cushion against the North Macedonian side, who in fairness were, I thought, quite decent in the second half the other night in Tala. And as for Sligo Rovers, well, I mean, the game is up pretty early, going 2 goals down pretty early. Couple of injuries, the tie is over. But look, it's 850,000 in the bank for Sligo, and hopefully with the packed crowd, packed attendance at the showgrounds on Thursday night, that they can at least put up a good showing.
Yeah, and so we'll start off on Pats. So going away to CSKA Sofia, winning 1-0. Serge Atakai with the goal in the 87th minute, a great moment, just as he kind of got through and then put the ball in the back of the net. And Conan, I suppose it was built on a very disciplined performance, and Joe Redmond in particular, his defensive stature at the back, he was immense.
He's been absolutely superb, Raf, throughout the season. But mainly in the last couple of games in Europe, he's been absolutely superb, because they've reverted to a back three with wing backs and then the box in midfield with Owen Doyle leading the line up front, and he's just marshalled it so well. I think the captain's armband that's been put on him since the European game against Mura at home has really brought him forward, because his leadership qualities on the pitch and with Gravosty and Brockbank either side of him, he's been absolutely immense. Garces, who scores for fun in the Bulgarian league, didn't get a kick. Now I don't think Garces was expecting such a tough game against Joe Redmond, so he'll up his game. Look, CSKA Sofia, I think on the night were really poor, very lethargic. They played like it was a pre-season friendly. Probably thought, like Mura, that it was going to be a walk in the park for them, and look, it wasn't at all. They didn't play their Bulgarian international, Georgi Yomov. He only came on at half time. Again, he didn't do much, but I expect him to start on Thursday. He's going to be a very, very good player. Just in that 10 position, going to create chances. And Bradley Denoyer, the left back, who's so important for CSKA Sofia going forward, because his pace is absolutely electric and frightening. But then you have Barry Cotter, who went from toe for toe and made a crucial interception in the first half when Denoyer thought he had got in behind him. So that's a good tussle to watch out for in Tallaght. From a St. Pat's point of view, it was a remarkable victory away from home, but Pats are kind of used to these victories away from home and not doing the job at home. Talking to the man here who played out in Legia Warsaw, and we had a fantastic 1-1 draw away and then got battered 5-0 in Tallaght. Mm-hmm. And I think that has to be taken into context here, is that St. Pat's have played 10 games away from Richmond Park, but at a home stadium, and they haven't won a game in those 10 games. Like even in Tallaght in the last 3, they've got beaten 5-0 by Legia Warsaw, 3-0 by Hanover, and 3-1 by Karpaty Leave. So it's going to be European nights in Richmond Park are massive for the club, for the fans. You're on top of the pitch, intimidating for the opposition players. But when you're in Tallaght, it's like a normal venue. You're playing away from home, from a St. Pat's point of view. So it's a hindrance straight away. But they have a 1-0 win to grasp onto. It didn't, like, CSK are going to improve. I think we can all agree on that. But I think Joe Nang, Joe Redmond, Adam O'Reilly, that kind of spine of the team are going to be so crucial. And just going to the goal, Raf, very quickly. Like, a lot has been talked about the goal itself and Serge Atakai's run and all, but I think the ball by Adam O'Reilly was fantastic as well, because it wasn't as if he was just booting it down the pitch. He put a bit of spin on it to spin back, and it made the defender didn't realise what it was, and he just he didn't follow through on it. It was just a punch ball, and the defender just thought it was a long ball over the top, tried to head it back, didn't get enough on it, and Atakai ran through and very bravely put it, went around the keeper and put it home. So I think we mentioned Joe O'Reilly or Joe Redmond, but Adam O'Reilly has been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and the template for this second leg, as you said, obviously the game is taking place in Tallaght as opposed to Richmond Park, and does that almost automatically turn it into I presume they're going to have to counterattack anyway, given the fact that it's CSKA who are goal down in the tie, but that it almost feels like another away tie, so it's almost same template as in Sofia, just obviously a little bit closer to home.
Yeah, as I said, I think the boxing midfield is so important for them, because you have Adam O'Reilly and now Jamie Lennon, who was brilliant the other night as well. He won the header from the corner to lead to the goal. And I think the two of them are absolutely spot on in terms of how they play with each other just in front of the back three. Then you have obviously Chris Forrester and Billy King in front, and Billy King was really, really good. Just his end product is over the last couple of games hasn't been what we're used to with Billy. And then with the wing backs, Anto Breslin, Barry Cotter, you have pace there, you have energy, you have fitness, stamina, you have all the ingredients necessary for those wing back positions to push up when needed to. But then when you have players that are coming at you, the likes of Denoyer, who is electric, you need people to go with him all the way, and Cotter can do that. And then you have the experience of Owen Doyle up front. So I think Tim Clancy has the ingredients and the correct ingredients to get a positive result on Thursday. I'm not saying that they're going to win the game, but in the sense that if they can, and I think it'd be the wrong tactics if they're just holding out for a draw. but play like they did in CSKA Sofia. Probably have to add a little bit more to it. And yeah, you could see one of the biggest upsets in Irish European history.
Yeah, and the knock-on effect of obviously their fixture schedule, of course, was that the Shelbourne game, as Jim said, was postponed. Originally supposed to take place on Friday, was then supposed to take place on Sunday, but of course, Pats were in Bulgaria at the time, just with the issues with their charter flight, and just their statement first, David, the Shelbourne statement, that is, we know that the FAI will now review of all the facts in front of them and determine next steps, and that they will contact us accordingly to discuss further. We trust this review will recognise that rescheduling would cause a further fixture backlog for Shelbourne FC. As it stands, we have just had 2 home games in 3 months. Equally, it is incredibly unfair on our supporters, volunteers and the Gardaí to have had Sunday's game called off at short notice, especially considering that this fixture had previously been rescheduled from Friday. We share our supporters' frustration at the inconvenience this has caused everyone at the club. Obviously, David, not too happy from the Shells' point of view.
Yeah, no, of course, understandable considering the game had to be rearranged in the first place to accommodate it. And then obviously the nature of the fact that it happened. Like, see, it's a bit of a strange one, this, because like Pats, even in the first place, Pats get, like, without getting bogged down by the details, when you kind of have to just to explain the situation in terms of even getting out there. Like, Pats, up until the day before they left, hadn't got a charter arranged. So just to get, like, just there's a sense here that, like, you know, everything was smooth sailing, even getting out there, and then like getting back was almost an afterthought. Like, obviously by rules at this stage of the competition, you have to go by charter. You can't go, say, by a scheduled airline flight and all the rest of it. Like, the day before Pats left, they were still arranging getting a flight out there, and they knew it was an issue. Like, they could only arrange that one-way charter flight. And even speaking to people who work in that industry, because again, everything needs context if you're dealing with it from the point of view of, well, why did this happen? Like, literally organising aircraft and organising staff to actually legally fulfill a flight is actually very difficult at the moment, you know. And I know there was some suggestion that Pats wanted to try and even get a bigger one, a bigger plane, so they could maybe get fans on it and then be able to get back. But then even that wasn't feasible. And then just the nature of the fact that once they got out there, the company who they'd been dealing with for the last while were then working like mad to try and even get them back straight away all after the game and do it. And it just proved impossible, even just sourcing that aircraft and sourcing staff to kind of, well, work on it. And then the issue I would say will be is that this, whether or not this was made clear even to the league or to Shelbourne before they left, like, I think that's maybe what could be an issue here as well. If Pats weren't flagging some of the issues that they were having to the FAO, even in terms of getting out there beforehand, and it was only afterwards that it was brought to light just what they were dealing with, well, then that's an issue. Do you know what I mean? But then I also go back to it, and my own point will be on this, and this goes for, say, Sligo, when you see what happened in the last round with the FAI Cup games, and also for when you want the league to progress. Like, the league is very condensed as it is. I know it's been obviously extended and all the rest of it, even with this year, with the under 21 windows where games aren't happening there, just to allow, say, because of the changing nature of squads now, where a lot of times games will be postponed when there's internationals on. But like, surely, and listen, it's hard now to talk about it because it should have been done beforehand. But going forward, there should just be something put in place for around European dates for League of Ireland clubs, just to provide some kind of help for them. Like, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, that Pats would have even been expected to play that game in between in the first place. Like, if you want your clubs to progress and you want them to stand any chance, making them play a game in between in this leg is incredible. And the fact that they won, and that's not even just saying because Pats have obviously had won as well. This goes for, say, Shamrock Rovers too, and it goes for Sligo. Like, you need to be, if you're making the season isn't going to be full length almost when you think about it compared to others, how it is condensed. You go back to some of the days, and it hasn't been as bad this year, but go back to a couple of the seasons where it was so top heavy, where you're playing like a massive amount of games at the top end of the season before a mid-season break, and then everything is spread out. Then it has to finish because, you know, clubs aren't paying full 52-week contracts. That's another issue here, and you can't talk about something in isolation. You have to talk about, well, where is the league as a whole? And this is just another factor. Like, it's a great problem to be having because it shows that what the League of Ireland clubs can be capable of. And you look at some of the results that they've had. But it's just, when something like this then does happen, it almost makes it out as if, well, it's Mickey Mouse stuff again. And that's how it does seem. Let's be honest, it does seem that way. And you can't help but feel, obviously, a huge element of frustration for Shelbourne in terms of the amount of games they've played over the last little while. I think it was two games. It's two home
games in 3 months. Yeah.
Like, and also when you think about it, like, think about the revenue that they've lost out on. Do you know what I mean? It's so important for cash flow and all the rest of it. But I just think if the allowances that have been made, and this goes back, and it has to be a part of the broader discussion. Like, it goes back to what's going on at the moment with the PFAI and basic contracts, you know, making sure that players in the leagues are actually getting paid minimum wage. Like, this is still an issue that's going on in 2022 in the League of Ireland. And it's not a case of, oh, well, you're throwing this kind of stuff out there to mask what's happened in this instance. It's a whole round package that you have to deal with the league, and it has to be rectified if it's moving forward. Because let's be honest, with the way the Conference League is now, and the way it is with maybe the League of Ireland in terms of the stage it's at, you would hope that getting through a couple of rounds at least would become a bit more of the norm, especially with the various competitions that are various, obviously Champions League, Europa League, and the Conference League. You would like to think that it's going to become an issue down the line. So something needs to be learned from this. That's the phrase in rugby, isn't it? Learnings and work on and all the rest of it. So, but genuinely, it does, just in terms of making sure something like this in the future isn't seen, where I don't know how you would do it. But
sorry, David, is it should they just make a clear diktat and say, right, if Pats have got to this stage that their game against Shelbourne doesn't happen, that game will be put back?
Well, see, I personally would say, like, surely, I don't know how it would be done with licensing and the fixtures and stuff, but yeah, like, surely if, like, clubs get to a certain stage in Europe or in around it, they can be 3 weeks for those clubs. And then, but then the issue with that then again, James, is the fact that some clubs don't even want to play players in pre-season. Some players, you know what I mean? Some clubs, and I'm not saying Shelbourne are one of them, but some clubs want the season as short as possible. Exactly. And they want it crammed in, as many games crammed in as possible. But if you're going to have a league that's actually respected and can thrive and is looked upon as professional, when, let's be honest, the whole league isn't professional. It's not. Like, you've got top end of it, middle end of it, that maybe is, but like that can't be the case. And you've still got, like, as I said, and I'm sure Conan will have maybe a greater understanding of this as well, when you've still got the PFAI fighting for basic standards that have been going on for the last decades, then that's part of the issue. It really is. And you can't, again, I'm saying, you can't have one topic without bringing up all the rest of it, because it all plays into the one.
We're going to see how that fixture backlog is, assuming St. Pat's get through. Now, again, they've got a tough second leg to play in the Europa Conference League, but if they do get to the playoff, of course, it'll be Brøndby of Denmark or FC Basel of Switzerland, two pretty big clubs on the European scene. Meanwhile, just very quickly on Sligo Rovers, they, off the back of two great legs against Motherwell in the second round, ended up playing Viking of Norway, lost 5-1 away from home. Zlatko Tripic and Samuel Fridtjonsson scoring the two early goals, and then David Cawley laid on with a consolation. But Conan, just on this one, I know I think you'd mentioned Zlatko Tripic as a player to watch out for from a Sligo point of view, but obviously when we look at it, obviously the result is a blow and they are definitely going to be going out. But at the same time, there has been some progression. The fact they got as far as they did, and when the dust settles after a few weeks, they'll be able to look back at this European journey with a bit of satisfaction.
Yeah, look, Tripic is their best player. He was magnificent on the night, a goal, and I think he got 3 assists as well. So he was their danger man, and I'm sure John Russell wasn't too happy with conceding 2 early goals in those 8 minutes. But they're the only European team that apart from Sligo, obviously, that have played. Shkupi had their game postponed. It was the opening day of the North Macedonian League this weekend, and they had their game postponed along with CSKA Sofia as well. So I think Viking are kind of quietly confident that they're going to get through this tie in the showgrounds, and they made 4 changes from the team that defeated Sligo, and they drew 2-0 with Sandefjord, having come in 2-0 down in the second half. And Maya Traore, who who scored in Stavanger on Thursday night. He scored again. He came off the bench at home last Thursday. So I reckon he's going to start. But yeah, look, Sligo got a magnificent victory yesterday. I think they have to concentrate now on getting back into Europe. I think that's the most important thing now for John Russell going forward, is that, yes, it's probably going to be too much of a task against a team of Viking to score 4 goals, albeit they did in 2014 beat a Lithuanian side 4-0 in the showgrounds. But I still think, obviously, with the quality within the Viking dressing room and squad, that even if they manage to get a positive result in the showgrounds, that they'll be doing really, really well. So their focus and attention will be turning to domestic matters from here on in. Obviously, being knocked out of the FAI Cup hasn't helped. And yeah, they'll be striving to get into that European spot so that the journey continues next year.
Yeah, for Shamrock Rovers, anyway, the journey, regardless of what happens in this tie in the Europa League against Shkupi, that will continue. Obviously, they have the fallback of the Conference League, but they might not need it at all because, of course, they won 3-1 at Tala in the first leg against Shkupi in the third qualifying round. So 1 foot in the playoff round. Graham Burke with a penalty on 13 minutes. Then Dylan Watts doubled it. And then Kevin which is not spelled Kevin, as we would understand it, of Shkupi, pulling one back just as Shkupi were sort of getting control of the game. And then at the very end, Conan, I mean, Gary O'Neill's goal, well taken. Like he had another long range shot earlier, but this one was just beautifully taken and really kind of a great moment, not just in terms of how it was finished, but also just that in a way it almost sets up that second leg where they do have that extra cushion.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the commentary as well of the goal as well. It was the two lads did a great job, but the ball, the corner coming in anyway, and it comes to Sean Horde, and knowing Sean, he loves getting on the score sheet, and I was just expecting him to pull the trigger, but even just he pulled the ball, he did a little drag back with his foot and played a wonderful ball to Gary O'Neill, who was able just to cushion it and put it into the top corner. And the scenes, even as a notorious Pats fan, it was hard to kind of not smile and give a little fist pump when they did put it in, because it's great. It's great for Irish football. It's great for Shamrock Rovers to put in a performance like that. And obviously with the Ludogorets game, conceding that third goal in the last minute over in Bulgaria, to do it themselves against Shkupi after their mad statement that they put out on the eve before the game as well. But look, I do think that the job isn't done. As you said, Kevin is a very, very good goal scorer. He's a creative midfielder as well. Sunday Adetunji as well, 20 goals last season for Shkupi, and he'll be a danger man back on home soil. And even Vladika Berdarovsky, he only came on at half time. I think he's going to start. He's numerous international caps, over 250 games in league games over the course of his career. He did well when he came on, so I think he'll start too. But I think like St. Pat's, I think Shamrock Rovers, they shouldn't be going out trying to hold on to what they have. Their squad is well capable of getting a very positive result, even a win against Shkupi over in North Macedonia. Graham Burke this is the level that he should be playing at. Absolutely fantastic player. Gaffney has been brilliant, but Dylan Watts, I think, as I mentioned before, Raf, I think these European games really suit him and his style of play. And again, another wonderful performance from him and Gary O'Neill in midfield. And I'm very optimistic about Shamrock Rovers' progression now and this week.
Yeah, another shout out as well. I think Chris McCann, of course, as well, had a brilliant game in midfield there. Now, he did pick up an injury and had to come off. I think also Graham Burke had a muscular one, and I think Burke's was a little less serious from what Stephen Bradley said earlier. But McCann, just in these type of European games with his experience, it's invaluable, and it does show, because once he went off, then Shkupi seemed to get a bit of a stranglehold of the game, and you were wondering what direction it was going to go, obviously, until that goal at the end, or the sending off, and then obviously O'Neill's goal at the end.
Yeah, like Chris McCann is a fabulous footballer, and I suppose if you're ever going to see him, you'll only see how good he actually is when you don't have the ball. So let's take, for example, if you're watching it on TV, you won't see how good a job Chris McCann is doing. You'll only get to see that live, and you're looking at him directly, because what he does for the Shamrock Rovers team in terms of his movement, in terms of dictating play, in terms of tracking runners and communication. It's so key to that side. Now, they don't lack experience in that area. Obviously, Gary O'Neill and Dylan Watts, they played against F91 Doodlelange 7 years ago in the Europa League for UCD. So these lads, that midfield trio have great experience at this level. But with Chris, it's just that I'm not going to say the age profile of him compared to the other two, but he's played a lot more games, Championship level with Burnley, Premier League level, and he's a wonderful footballer. But as I said, if you're looking at him on telly, you don't get to see the real Chris McCann. You can only see him when you're watching him live, and that's where you really see the quality of his play.
And do you know what? On that way with Chris McCann, if it's one of them where we always get the sense with him, it's one of those great what if kind of stories, because if you go back to say around 08-09, he was part of the Burnley team under Owen Coyle, like promoted to the Premier League. The team that was doing really well and started the Premier League, and in the first month did his cruise ship when Burnley got up and stayed up. They had a great season in that first year, but he was like their main man. And if you think back to that time around then, obviously Trapattoni was the manager of Ireland. He's just coming in. Like, you've got Chris McCann, who was just a left-footed player, young, was getting around. Like, he just had so much going for him, and then he had a couple of really bad injuries that just knocked him back. And then obviously still went on and had a great career at championship level. But it is one of those, I kind of look back thinking you never know what could have happened if that injury hadn't happened. Because even back then, and it's amazing what can happen in the space of 10 years, but even back then, one of those injuries was a lot more career threatening than it even would be now. Obviously, it still is now with the recovery and all. But like Colin's right, when you see him play, like the age profile, I think you only short of calling him an now lad, but compared to the rest, but he's just a class act. And when you see him play, it's just, especially for midfielders, like, it's just brilliant to watch him play. Like,
yeah, so Shamrock Rovers 1 foot in the UEFA Conference League group stages, should they go through, obviously, but also they have the card also within the Europa League itself of getting to the playoff round if they do finish the job off. Karabag of Azerbaijan or Ferencvaros of Hungary waiting in the next round. And then domestically, there obviously were games. There was the Shelbourne Pats game, as we said, which was called off, but at the top, near the top end anyway, Dundalk and Derry City drew 1-1. Patrick Hoban with a late equaliser after James Akintunde had given Derry an early lead. Then Finn Harps beating Dundee United 3-0, Mihailovic, and then McWoods with a brace later on. So that's kind of crucial down the bottom end ahead of a big game between UCD and Harps this weekend. And then Sligo Rovers, after that first leg in Europe, coming back home, and then with Max Mata scoring the brace, beating Bohemians 2-1. So very briefly on this, Conan, because I know you have to shoot off fairly quickly, but at the top end anyway, it's a result that Shamrock Rovers, busy with trying to fight the good versus evil thing over in North Macedonia and being on the evil side after what Shkupi have said. They'll be delighted by the results between Dundalk and Derry City there.
Yeah, absolutely, and seeing Pat Hoban do what he does best, I'd say there was a big cheer around some houses around Tala and Ringsend, if you want to go down that road. But yeah, it was absolute textbook from him. Really poor defending from Derry City and Mark Connolly in particular. He just dropped too deep, dropped it inside his own 6-yard box from a left from Stephen Bradley's cross. And playing with Stephen Bradley, you'd know that he's left-footed, so you'd expect him to step up. But he didn't. He stepped back and allowed Pat Hoban coming across him. But what a finish, what a goal. 9th of the season. He's still the best centre forward in the league, in my opinion. Just, he's such an all-rounder. His strength, his hold-up play, he can drop into the 10, bring others into play. And he just scores goals. Like, I think this is going to be his 5th season in a row where he hits double figures. Now, when as a striker, you should be doing that, but he's suffered some injuries over the last number of years as well. So to still hit double figures every season is pretty impressive. And yeah, with Finn Harps, it was a great win for them. It takes them back off the bottom of the table after UCD climbing above them last week. It's the first win in 12, absolutely crucial. The first time they scored 3 goals at home, first time a player has scored a brace for them this season. So all good for Finn Harps this season, this weekend, going into the game against, as you say, UCD next week. That's going to be massive. Really looking forward to that one. And then with Sligo, I think it was a tentative affair. I would have liked Bohemians to get started on the front foot. knowing that Sligo had a bit of an excursion and a bit of a trip and a bit of a game on Thursday against Viking, and they didn't. They kind of a tentative affair early on, and obviously they got the goal in the second half through John O'Sullivan. But I think the substitutions that John Russell made at half time were absolutely key. He brought on obviously Max Maida, who made a huge difference, and their new signing Robert Burton from Dynamo Zagreb on loan. But with Max Maida, he went into the centre forward position, and they dropped Aidan Keena into the 10, which is something that I probably wouldn't suspected from Aidan Keena. I would have always said he's a number 9. He'll fox in the box, score goals, but he was really, really good. And Max Maida took his goals really, really well, and a fully deserved victory, I would have said. But with Bohemians, I think it's 10 out of 24 games this season that they've taken the lead. They've taken the lead in that they've dropped points, and it's just unacceptable. Now, I think with the players that they brought in, this might be just a once-off, because these type of events were happening earlier on in the season. Keith Long has brought in some really, really good players, and I think hopefully from a Bows point of view, you think it's going to be a once-off, because Max Maida did change the game when he came on. But yeah, I still need to see more from Bohemians. Their last few wins have been teams around the bottom of the league, and they're struggling with teams above them.
Yeah, and just very, very briefly, obviously in the first division, then Galway drawn 2-2 at Wexford, Cork City beaten Athlone 6-1. It looks like, again, like the gap in the table on paper doesn't look massive, but obviously there's a couple of points, but obviously Cork City having the game in hand. It looks like they just have that little bit of a grip on it.
Yeah, it looks like that, and Wexford causing more upsets now with their play. They love going out to the west of Ireland anyway. But yeah, Conor Barry against his old club with 2 goals. The first one was absolutely fantastic. Great finish, catching the keeper early and off guard. But as you say, Cork, 3 points clear, game in hand, scoring goals for fun. Barry Coffey with a hat-trick. Josh Owen as well. He getting the second goal in consecutive games. And Rory Keaton as well off the mark. So yeah, very, very confident that Cork will do the job now. But Galway will be kicking themselves that they didn't take the 3 points against Wexford. But they will be happy with Rob Manley scoring goals. They needed himself, and Stephen Walsh are doing particularly well, and Waterford on their coattails, but a little bit further afield from the top 2.
Very good. Anyway, Conan, we'll let you go. Obviously, your journey now isn't going to be as arduous as Pat's journey back from Bulgaria. But we'll let you get off in time anyway. So look, thanks a million for coming on this week.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Conan Byrne. Also, Jim McMahon had to pop off there as well. But that leaves myself and David Sneyd before Miguel Delaney logs on. But one thing we didn't talk about in terms of Bohemians was their new signing, Jonathan Afolabi, who has arrived kind of a circuitous route. Obviously, there was a point where he was signed up by Celtic, and he's had a bit of an interesting career since he left our shores, David.
Yeah, this was when Bowles sent the email out announcing this signing. It was one of those where you're like, oh, this is interesting. This could be a bit different. I know Conan was talking there about the fact the amount of points that they've dropped from being in strong positions and winning and not being able to hold on to leads. I think getting a signing like this, obviously it's not going to shore up a defence or midfield, but it's going to fill a gap in terms of, not so much fill a gap, but you've lost promise on my share, so you needed to replace a player like caliber. And yeah, like Afolabi, you go back to the underage one was at 19s where he was in the team of the tournament, and for Ireland he was really highly regarded, and just the Celtic move just never seemed to really work for me. He had a couple of loans in Scotland. Like, he was training with Shamrock Rovers. Shamrock Rovers had been really keen over the last little while to try and bring him in, and I think there was some issue where maybe his agent didn't maybe quite want the move to come back to Ireland. He wanted to keep him in the kind of system almost around in Britain. But yeah, like Keith Long goes as tends to be the case. Sometimes they can just pull off a deal that you haven't seen coming, and this could be a good one for him for the rest of the season. Now, it can be tricky as well because he's coming in midway through a season and he's going to have to hit the ground running. But he is a player where if things can click for him, he's going to excite lads and he's going to score goals. And it's a common theme, but we spoke about this with other lads. It's one of those players where, especially at his age and the position he's in, about learning the game, getting that sense of a rhythm in your game and just feeling confident in yourself and getting those minutes. And Bowles will definitely give him that. And if he can deliver goals, all the better for it. But it's just it could be a very interesting subplot for both for the rest of the season if they are going to try and kick on and finish the season strongly and possibly have a cup run, because you get the sense now that's something that's going to really need to help save their season, considering how it's gone, is to maybe deliver a bit of silverware.
Yeah, they have Dundalk on Friday, and then the other fixture at the same time, 7:45 kickoff, Dundee United against Shelbourne, and also UCD and Finn Harps, as I said. And then also this would have been bigger maybe if Derry City hadn't had that fall off in the middle of the season. But Derry City against Shamrock Rovers, so Rovers obviously will be somewhat distracted by the second leg in Europe, so it's an opportunity for Derry City. But again, as we said, Shamrock Rovers looking at that result midweek at the weekend between Dundalk and Derry City. I mean, they have a bit of a cushion.
Well, that's it. Like the way to see, as you mentioned it yourself, Raf, like the way the season's kind of panned out, you are hoping that Derry would be able to maintain. Or would have been very difficult for them to maintain that early form where they weren't unbeaten, but when they were top. But the manner of the fall off, and wasn't it at that point where they, it was like 7-8 games where they didn't win, and they just I think in fairness, I remember speaking to Rory Higgins after a match at Talca Park, which probably was a few months ago now, which is probably the last time Shels played at home. But and even Rory Higgins, he was kind of saying, listen, he knew there was going to be bumps in the road, but I don't think he was quite expecting the nature of how it has gone. For his team. Maybe again, a handy little reminder. Obviously you need to bring in Mark Connolly as well, considering they lost Hall. But Rovers, like Stephen Kenny mentioned this point again, I'm going back to it, but Stephen Kenny made a point last week, just doesn't seem as if there's a real strong challenger to Rovers at the moment, and we give them something to think about in the league, and they can go, and we're talking about fixtures and all the rest of it as well, and the fact that obviously Derry made sure that this fixture still went ahead on the day it was scheduled to go on. But the thing is, you just expect with Rovers, like the squad they have, the experience that they have, and the depth that's there, they could go there and still get a result. Like there's still a sense of a greater amount of pressure on Derry to go and deliver, because they need to, especially in front of those fans, and getting a sense of momentum that they just haven't, other than those early parts of the season. It's just kind of flatlined a little bit, and it's kind of a bit of a story of the season domestically, really. Like you're kind of looking at it thinking, it just seems as if Rovers are not so much. I think sleepwalking to the title is a bit unfair, but I just think Rovers are going to be able to almost play within themselves and ease themselves to another title, which just gives you a bit of an indication of how far ahead they are of the rest of the challengers.
Yeah, which makes obviously the cup, as I think as we said about Bohemians, it makes the cups as huge for the likes of themselves. Well, Derry, Bows, Dundalk as well. I mean, just to have that extra thing to shout about in a way that maybe obviously over on the other side of the water, an FA Cup doesn't really add any. Liverpool were almost disappointed to win one. Yeah,
like it's one of them where. Yeah, I don't know. I think the cup still has a bit of a luster here. I do think in terms of like the day that's in it and all the rest of it and what goes around it. But there is still that sense, especially for a club like Rovers now. And like it's almost for them, the cup should be part of the season. Do you know what I mean? Rather than the be all and end all. But for like say the likes of a Dundalk or a Derry at the stage there, that under say Stevie O'Donnell or Rory Higgins, the cup can be a bit of a platform, a bit of a catalyst for something else. But the fact that Derry had already shown what they could be capable of consistently over a few months, that's what they need to get back to. And that's going to be a bigger thing for them for the rest of the season, as well as obviously winning a cup. If they can show that they can really get back on the horse after being just so poor for the last couple of months, that'll be a big thing going into next season. But it's just disappointing that we're on the 8th of August and we're already talking about what they should be doing to try and make a challenge for next season,
Yeah, and also in the Women's FAI Cup, Bohemians beat Sligo 3-1. So that Sligo had obviously had a great weekend last weekend by shocking Shelbourne, and Shells though got back to winning ways, beating Peamount, their great rivals, 3-2 to make the semi-finals. Gemma Quinton with the late winner. And then Wexford beat DLR Waves 3-1, and Athlone, who are having a brilliant season, beat Cork 2-0. And I think this is a cue also for Miguel Delaney, who has joined us. We were just talking about FA Cups there on a weekend where the Premier League has made its grand return. So an unwelcome mention. But how are you, Miguel?
Good. I was at Manchester City yesterday. Well, at West Ham, who were playing Manchester City, in what I felt like an ominous exhibition for the rest of the season. And just it felt like I must say, having seen the Fulham game the previous day, which was really entertaining, showed how Fulham could put it up to Liverpool, kind of a real bite about it. This was so dull. I mean, because the whole match just felt like basically City comfortably waiting until they had an opening and just taking it. Now, there's a few murmurs that all is not well between Moyes and the West Ham squad, so that could be part of it. But even then, like, it was just... It essentially, as soon as City decided to raise it, they scored. It was only twice. Because even the first, just before the first goal, there was one move which came from a lovely Haaland touch. De Bruyne had a goal ruled out for offside. Then the second one was where Haaland finally makes one run like that. He's released. West Ham can cope, penalty, smashes it into the corner. So, like, while you might usually say a penalty is a cheap goal to get his first, it came from his run and the way he took the penalty as well. And then the second goal was just... the second goal, actually, in some ways, it's a classic Haaland goal. But it looks like it's more worrying for everyone else, just in the sense that that's actually something City have missed for the last few years. And that so much of football has been this kind of, this kind of flowing collective, and so much possession and passes until they get into a position where someone cuts it back to the edge of the box, and another player is arriving to score. Whereas with this, now if you step out against City, rather than kind of, sit back and try and stop them passing through you, but if you step out, how many times are we going to see this happen this season? It's a bit like kind of Gerrard and Torres, or Gerrard knowing where it's going to be De Bruyne just slipping the ball through to Haaland. And that's it. And I do worry that's going to be the case for the start of the season. And by the time the World Cup comes around, even though it could disrupt it, they could be well away.
Yeah, and even, seeing Haaland in the flesh within this system, Miguel, there were, even on TV, I think there was a moment where before Gundogan played that ball that led to the penalty, I think there was one earlier where Haaland looked a little bit frustrated that the ball wasn't released as quickly by Gundogan before. So there are still little teething problems within the system, but once that starts to click, that is going to be quite scary for everybody else.
Well, there is something there in the sense that even after the game, Guardiola wasn't completely willing to indulge the kind of all the gushing praise for Haaland, because he was talking about how, I want to improve him as a player. Obviously, loads of managers do that. If you want to go as far back as kind of Ferguson with Andy Cole, how he turned him into something other than a goal scorer. And from what you hear from City's training ground is that Guardiola wants Haaland to press much more, so to change his game a little bit. And apparently, while Guardiola calls all the players by their first name, he calls Haaland by his surname all the time, which is making people laugh in the City training ground. It's kind of like this teacher-pupil relationship. But once that happens, this is the other side as well. Even if Haaland does have teething problems, which could be possible for the next few months, although it doesn't look like the case, what happens then? Then he's got 5 weeks off to basically work on his game and hone it during a World Cup.
Well,
I'm not sure how much I'm selling this Premier League title.
You're really enthused by this season, Miguel. Swear down.
But it's just the point Miguel is making there, David. If that's what teething problems look like, I don't know what the full blown toddler / childhood to adult sort of trajectory looks like for Haaland then.
I know, even the sense that Haaland might actually make Kevin De Bruyne look like an even better player with the amount of goals he could be getting on the back of it. It's incredible to think about it. Now, listen, there's one of them where, let's be honest, some people were almost writing Haaland off because he had a bad charity shield or community shield, or talking about, even tying in with some of the nonsense on social media about Darwin Nunez when he missed a couple of chances in training, and he's getting written off as some sort of fraud, just the nature of how football is, especially on social media. But and I'll be honest, I'd be one of them where I was actually excited to see how he played, because other than a couple of Champions League games, I haven't really seen Erling Haaland play. You see some of the finishes and you see how he is, but the goal for the penalty, and like what Miguel said, how he won that penalty, just the speed of thought in terms of seeing where the ball is and then reacting and then saying, well, this is the run I have to make. It's just so sharp. And obviously the run itself, the speed he has, but it's a speed of thought that is just on a different level, it seems. And even the fact that he's running in behind, but it's not as if even for the goal, that first goal, the penalty, that he has 30 yards to run into, which he kind of did for the second, and then it can adjust his body. He's running into very short space and still has the awareness, I suppose. He knew what was coming with the goalkeeper. It was very clever. it was clearly a penalty, I suppose. It wasn't as if it was one of them where he won it, but it was just the speed of thought. And I think that's why, in terms of teething problems, maybe there'll be issues, but if he was just relying purely on pace and power and being a bit of a bully, you would say, you know what, maybe he won't hit the ground running. But when you see how clever he actually seems to be with how he uses his power and his strength, that it's not as if the power and strength is what he solely relies on, even though it's so clear in the pace. I think it's just some of like the cleverness. Even the second goal, he had so much space to run into. Like he times his run perfectly.
That's the thing. I mean, because of his size, you're almost kind of fooled in thinking that he's a bruiser. He's all about physique. Whereas actually, what stands out about his game more than anything, is his movements, as you say. Yeah. And even I love the way he took that second goal, which is basically, I mean, he didn't even take a touch to set him. He actually set himself with his own movement that kind of went around the ball, and then just the easy finish.
It was so good, wasn't it? And it's one of them where I think now by rights, I think Cavani had the mantle of you had to talk about his movement every time you spoke about him. But that's now where it'll be at with Haaland. You know, it is, and like even not that you despair for what could happen in terms of like it's almost as if you see what happened in that. And Miguel mentioned it, like the Fulham Liverpool game, how entertaining it was. I don't think a City Fulham game would be as entertaining because I think City just have something else about them where they can just grind teams a lot more than say a Liverpool. I think that it's the first weekend in the season, and it's going to be a mad season because obviously just going to be the break with the World Cup. But I think and maybe we'll touch on what's happening with West Ham. It does seem ominous, and maybe it could be that first weekend where everything seems great for some clubs and brutal for the rest. And the natural order would be obviously where players will come in and out of form. But the nature of what City squad is, they have such a good squad, they can deal with that.
The one thing I would say in that is I think you're absolutely right in the World Cup. This, for all we naturally draw perceptions from the first weekend just because we've had 2 months without football.
No. 2 months without football in England again. 2 months without football in England.
Well, and actually, even there,
and even then, there's been the Euros.
Yeah, I've had the women's Euro, so I've been a disgrace from me, and I went to games. But sorry, 2 months without the Premier League, should I say, or 2 months without seeing the teams. Yeah. But I think it's probably underappreciated just how much of an effect it is, because we don't know how this World Cup is going to distort things. I think quite a lot, and even if you look at that, we just thinking about it yesterday. Like, see, most of City's players, and above all, De Bruyne at this age, now he's in his 30s, are probably going to be starters for their team in the World Cup. A fair few of them would at least get to the quarterfinals. That's going to have a big. Whereas Liverpool, I think, only have 2 certain starters who are Van Dijk and Alisson. Even Thiago, because he has injury issues again this week. He may not start for Spain. Henderson may not start for England, which even if they're away for a long time, just obviously takes away from some of the intensity. Means they're not quite as emotionally involved either. And that I mean, even if City are 10 points clear by November, as an example, just because it's almost like one of those old Argentine seasons, South American seasons, with a first half and a second half.
Just because the apertura and the clausura kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, just it's so different in that regard.
Yeah. Before we will talk about the World Cup a little bit later on, because I don't know. I think you wrote a piece which was more about is the Premier League too big to fail? So I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit later on, and the World Cup, just where it's taking place and all that. It just kind of feels symbolic of where the game is at. But Liverpool, though, as just been touched upon there, obviously Darwin Nunez getting a goal. Well, at least it looked like it was going to be given as an own goal, and so we saw the replay as they came back to draw 2-2 against Fulham, and then setting up Mo Salah as well for the late equaliser. But there was something off about the attack you were saying there before Nunez came in, Miguel.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's one of those situations. It felt like, when even though he's brought in Nunez for that sort of money, just because it's the first game, it's amazing how often managers do this. It's almost like the first game they'll always stick to last season and introduce the new signing as a sub or whatever. But it did feel like a mistake in this time, just because, I mean, Firmino, as brilliant as he's been for Liverpool, and even within this game, there was 1 or 2 nice touches. He's just not the presence he was. It felt like he was kind of flitting in and out of the game. And then suddenly he brings on Darwin Nunez. And it's like the entire match isn't attracted towards Darwin. The amount of times the ball went to him, often had 3 Fulham defenders on him. And that, of course, actually gave so much more space for Salah. Liverpool have Palace next week. So I think at home, Nunez will surely have to start. Then, of course, Manchester United after that away. Let's see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have too many concerns, even though there's obviously a bit of furore today about their midfield. It did just look. It looked like it all fit much better once Nunez came on.
Yeah, but the narrative has been sort of Nunez is there to replace Sadio Mane, but is it really more of a case that Luis Diaz, the signing in January, was sort of brought in as the longer term replacement? Obviously, he shared the pitch with Mane in big matches, including the Champions League final, and then Nunez is sort of more the long term replacement for Firmino, even though their games are totally different.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I didn't notice in that regard was just it did feel like Liverpool made much more sense to have to just pace either side of a straight number 9. Now, I suppose that will mark a bit of a difference just because, I mean, the nature of the old forward line, and it is such a change for me. Like that can't be discounted either, just because, I mean, the last half decade has basically been dominated by that forward line. I know it started to be broken up, as you said there, with the introduction of Luis Diaz, but there's a difference between one of them being in and out of the team and one of them leaving, as has happened now with Mane. And I think that does have a psychological impact, especially given how important Mane was, especially after, from 2018 on, the kind of evolution in his own game. And it will now require an evolution, adaptation about Liverpool. And one thing about Diaz as well, I mean, he's so electric to watch, but there's still that slight sense he's a little bit lacking in finished product almost, or something, which could be seen actually for their first big chance of the game. Firmino put him through when he hit the post. And this isn't denied that he's a brilliant, impactful player who's superb, but it does feel like he's not the finished article yet.
Even on that, and is that the case that did maybe when they've actually brought him in, that they brought him in a bit early because I think other clubs were sniffing around maybe. So I think obviously he had, as you say, like I think his qualities when he came in last January were exactly what Liverpool needed at that stage in the season, in terms of just injecting something that was a bit lacking in terms of an intensity, a bit more whatever. And but as you say, like maybe, but that will come, you would imagine. I think Klopp was kind of proving that, hasn't he, where he can kind of, he seems to be ideal, him and the staff are kind of smoothing some of the rough edges, but then keeping just that little bit that's needed, a bit of madness almost of keeping that quality of a player and not kind of, I don't know, not beating it out of them, honestly.
Not smoothing out all the edges in the game, and it's why he's different to Pep Guardiola in that way.
Sorry, but even with Mane, like, because you look at what Mane, the amount of times where even Klopp would kind of talk about how he knew Mane could get wound up, and he didn't want to take that out of his game because he knew how important it was. He kind of knows exactly where he wants the line to be for each of his players. And I was even just thinking, like, the different types of players they have as well. Like, say, I was laughing to myself. That makes me seem like a bit of a weirdo, but like kind of the thought of, say, Nunez and Jota even linking up, it could almost be like a Noel Quinn, Kevin Phillips type job if needs be, in terms of just mixing up. It might not always have to be a tree. It might not always have to be that system. They actually have that capability now where they can change it slightly. And
that's true. Yeah, like
where you have a Jota playing off, and obviously he's injured at the moment, but like, I think that could be important as well for Liverpool, where it's not just everyone knows, right, well, if Salah's not playing, this is still going to be the system. I think they have a bit more of a capability now to actually mix it up a little bit, which could be important going forward.
Yeah, totally. And on that, again, I suppose it would just, because to come back to the World Cup, because we're going to have to. The other side, okay, fair enough. Haaland is off for 5 weeks, but so are Salah and Diaz, and that's why Salah could be in a really dangerous level after Qatar.
Yeah. The other point we're going to talk about before we get to the World Cup, Manchester United, of course, losing to Brighton 2-1, and obviously Pascal Gross should be the headline act in terms of the fact that he did score both goals for Brighton, but everybody's talking about Manchester United, obviously, because it's a carryover of problems that existed prior to Erik ten Hag. And you look at the team sheet that's been named, and you look at the base of midfield where there's been a lot of focus on trying to bring in Frankie de Jong, and I don't know if that's going to happen necessarily, but you see Fred and McTominay, or McFred as they're generally known. And in terms of what Ten Hag wants to implement, Miguel, I mean, they've a long road to go. There's just too many question marks there. There's obviously Cristiano Ronaldo, who you get a sense maybe the manager would, in his ideal system, would not have a player like that up front, but again, left him out at the starting lineup. But there's so many question marks there. I'm not sure what the template or what the idea is supposed to be.
I think, I mean, I would say Ten Hag himself knows what he wants as a manager, as a coach. He's tried to apply it. The initial noises from United were quite good. The players liked it. But I do feel like this result, and this is why it could be so damaging no matter what the manager's trying to do. I did feel like this is ultimately tied to bigger issues rather than specifically Ten Hag, which was, and he referenced this himself, which was as soon as they went behind, which can happen, it just felt like all of the problems of the last few years kind of caved in themselves, and it just took away all any positive momentum they had. It does remind that, I suppose, there are core issues with this club. Even with United, it's because there's so much. I mean, Brighton were interesting opposition, and I think they were, like, Mark Critchley, my colleague, The Independent, did a good piece this morning on how they're kind of the anti-Manchester United and how everything at the club works to a specific ideal, even if you want to get into transfers, right to the fact that they actually sell for huge money and still improve the squad. Whereas United just don't work to some ideal. Now, Ten Hag is supposed to be the first step in that to something bigger. Let's see if it actually happens. But it's also why there was such an element of deflation about it, because if it is the first step, to start with that, and suddenly if that set them back further, it does just show how so much of the club is dysfunctional. Because I mean, for me, I still have to say, I think United should have gone for Pochettino just because of the kind of psychological impact he can have on a club, how he can kind of lift it, because he did it at Spurs. But that said, I did think Ten Hag was an immediate improvement on everything they've had for the last few years, because he's a coach in an upward curve who's kind of at the forefront of the game like that. I mean, like Mourinho and Van Gaal were past it, Solskjaer and Moyes, but never really had it. Whereas Ten Hag, and everything you heard from the training ground was that there was an improvement in terms of, this is all actually one of the first times, other than Rangnick, who didn't have the kind of authority because he was short term, one of the first times this squad had kind of been trained in this sort of approach. It was having an effect, and then it just goes into that where it all just unravels through a few kind of one goal goes against him, and then you know problems start to appear everywhere. Although from the first moment of the game, it did feel symbolic. Like I'm not one of these that thinks it's necessarily a problem that Lisandro Martinez is 5'8". I mean, everyone's pointed out now that Cannavaro was even shorter, but it still was conspicuous that first moment of the game, Brighton trying to launch one over his head, and even if that didn't really expose Martinez, Brighton used it as an opportunity to just get at United and press, and that set the tone for the whole game.
Yeah, and the wider issue as well when it comes to Manchester United is there still a sense that there's that kind of cult of the manager, in a sense that maybe doesn't exist as strongly at other clubs, and it's kind of looking at the transfer market and how they've dealt with it. Obviously, he's going back to what he knows, which is obviously understandable in terms of going for, as you said, Martinez, and then players he's worked with at Ajax or within the Dutch system. But we look at all the managers they've had before, they have brought in, even going back to David Moyes, bringing in, you know, Marwan Fellaini, and it's maybe not part of the long-term plan of the club, but it is part of the long-term plan of the manager. And a lot of the planning seems to be based on who the manager is, as opposed to where the club and the philosophy is supposed to go, as with Manchester City, where you would imagine there is some sort of succession planning when Pep Guardiola does eventually leave.
I mean, if you look at what City were, I mean, for 5 years, the club had been built up so that Guardiola was ready to walk into a perfect situation. Now, that was obviously aided by the fact that they're owned by a state, had huge infrastructure even before financial fair play came in. We United, I mean, and really, this is what United should be doing. They should be reshaping the entire club while making the right appointments to kind of placehold and keep them in the Champions League places while it happens. But it doesn't feel like this has happened. And while certain signings make sense in terms of what Ten Hag wants, obviously, even right down to De Jong and that saga, he specifically wants him because he thinks that De Jong gets his football so much that he'll accelerate the understanding of the team. But it still feels like it's just basically it's going to what the manager wants rather than something that fits into an overall ideal the manager himself should fit into. And that's fine if the manager works out. This is the thing that should be said. But if the manager doesn't work out, which isn't impossible, just because because even Ten Hag has to adapt to a new situation here. He's gone from the Dutch league to one of the biggest clubs in the world. That is a jump. But if the manager doesn't work out, then suddenly, and they've brought in loads of former Ajax or Eredivisie players, once again, it's basically a squad that's now made up of the ideas of 5 managers rather than 4. And I suppose that's the issue. But again, you can forgive it just because Ten Hag is coming into a little bit of a kind of because the situation he's coming into. But that should emphasise the importance of United getting their structure right. But again, that structure is dependent on what the Glazers are as owners, and they get into all the bigger issues of the club. Because, it is, for all it's become comedy for so many people. It's not good for football that any club can be taken over in the way Manchester United were. They can be used in the way Manchester United were. And that, this is one of the few clubs, actually, because the way football has gone, disparity, the financial disparity, this is one of the few clubs that can actually properly compete with the state-owned clubs if they were run correctly. But they're not.
Yeah, clearly. We'll just touch on the World Cup because obviously it's come up. It's going to have a massive impact on the season, whether it's in the Premier League, La Liga, or wherever else. But it does feel, in a way, the World Cup itself is kind of symbolic of the wider problems of the game. We're still talking about state power, given where this World Cup is taking place this summer, but also the wider issues and question marks over sort of fixture congestion. The calendar, and we're going to see that, I suppose, with what's going to happen in Europe in terms of the future and this court case that involves the European Super League. But just where it's wedged this winter, it just feels very symbolic, Miguel.
Yeah. And and this is the thing. I wrote my own preview for the Independent the week going into the week that it's its 30th anniversary. We're at a point where the Premier League has never been bigger. It's the biggest show in town. But what actually happens then? It's the one competition that can arguably claim to be bigger, even though it doesn't actually generate as much money as the Premier League, the World Cup, that distorts the whole thing, changes it, influences it. And that because of that, we're going to see a lot of kind of, shall we say, convenient discussion, because suddenly it suits them to talk about the effect of sports washing in Qatar and all the how wrong it is the World Cup's being held here at this time, given what they want it for, given sports washing. But then, of course, the Premier League's been as complicit in the rise of sport. The first major sports washing takeover, which was Manchester City, although a lot of people at this point would say Chelsea 2003, given what happened there, given Abramovich's connections to Putin. But that was all the start of it. That created this new world in football, showed the potential for states and the benefits to them in taking over football clubs. And that's been the story. Like Manchester City, we started off talking about how ominous the first game was. Well, again, if they win the title this year, it's 5-6 and 3 in a row. And I know United did 5 and 6 under Ferguson, and he did 3 in a row twice. And financial disparity was part of that, but particularly the second time. But it still wasn't on the same scale. Like the numbers involved now are so much greater. The way the point returns are so much greater. The positions are so much more fixed, and that it's like when Ferguson won his first 3 in a row, in the third of those seasons, Ipswich finished 5th. Now that's not happening. And again, people always point to Leicester in these arguments, but the reason why Leicester was a 4,000 to 1 miracle, why it was so hailed, was because it was so impossible to repeat. So that's not an argument against this situation. It actually proves a point that something like that was so miraculous.
Yeah, and I guess that we're talking about Newcastle as possibly the only other club joining it, and there's a reason why they're the only club that are going to possibly join and mix with that top 6, and because of the same issues you're talking about.
Yeah, and they probably, just by sheer force of numbers, they probably will disrupt it at some points. It does feel like they're at the moment they're after James Maddison. It does feel like that'll be kind of a little bit of almost a touchstone moment, because if Leicester do agree to sell him, then you are talking about Newcastle just buying Leicester's place, basically, just leapfrogging them, becoming that team outside the big 6, trying to push their way in. But there's been an interesting dynamic there, of course, because Newcastle, because of their owners, they haven't. They've been fully conscious that anytime they go for a player, every selling club, particularly in Europe, just bumps up the price by 10 million, whatever. Which is why, and then Newcastle tried to not get into that, tried to kind of be resistant to it and show they won't pay it. Which is ironically meant they've sort of underspent this year, and with some of that, of course, tied to financial fair play. But of course, the same ultimate owners are shelling out hundreds of millions more on golf. With the LIV Golf Tour.
Yeah, and also their involvement in Formula One, as we've seen in the last couple of years as well. But the other point, of course, with the growth and continued growth of the Premier League, and I don't know where this, whether there is some bubble here that will be burst at some point, but you made a point in your piece that it's threatening to hollow out European football in the way European football hollowed out South America 3 decades ago, quickly absorbing everything of worth elsewhere. That is kind of a scary thought. I mean, we've seen how the leagues in Brazil and Argentina have been impacted by that route that the vast majority of any players with any inkling of talent end up playing in Europe and at progressively younger and younger ages. And if we're seeing the same thing happening on the continent, even in, if you're to go to clubs like, and obviously there's more to it than just that, but, your Steaua Bucharest, who could go on and win a European Cup in the 1980s, or even Dinamo Kiev, who could maybe 25 years ago compete, these are all falling by the wayside, and it's basically the Premier League and even the likes of La Liga. Lots of clubs below the big ones in La Liga and Serie A are sort of left by the wayside.
Well, I mean, the Super League project is it's primarily really based on the fact that the big European clubs feel left behind. That this is their way to kind of compete again, and that shows where. I mean, and it's interesting actually as well, because you referenced it there, but at the moment there's this court case. Well, it's not even reached the court case yet. The latest has been it's to decide whether it will go to actual court. And basically, this is the future of football side of it. And the current case is that the Super League are trying to argue that UEFA have a monopoly, a business monopoly, through their ability to create, or through their sole ability to create competitions in Europe. And obviously, what all these clubs want to do is just make up their own competitions and earn a fortune off it, and make up things like the Super League. Now, of course, UEFA would argue, or their big defense in all this is that monopoly is necessary because it isn't a normal business. This is the culture of Western European football. That sport isn't a business in that sense. That's a fair argument. It's certainly the one UEFA should be putting. It could well be powerful in court, but it depends on whether the court takes a purely contractual or technical view of this and looks at it in terms of purely business, or takes an ideological political view, which is accepting the position of sport. But the current attack line or one of the arguments made by the European Super League is that how can UEFA say that they are actually defending that this is necessary for the culture of sport, where they've overseen a culture where 90% of football's wealth is in a very few small pockets of Europe. I mean, that and they're actually, obviously, I don't think the Super League project is right. I don't think particularly with the way it was announced last April. But there is actually merit to that argument that how can the culture of European football be where just all the money is funneled into one, and it becomes self-perpetuating, and that's where UEFA could potentially lose, where we could be getting into a situation where UEFA is broken up or something like that. Not necessarily the clubs would just be able to go and create their own competition, but that things start to fracture a little bit. But yeah, cool. We're getting into a lot bigger debates there than I suppose in this weekend's Premier League.
I wonder how naive it is of me to think it, but when you look back to last year when the Super League was announced and the plans for it, but look at the reaction from the fans.
Yeah,
like the nature of, and it wasn't just one club or whatever, and there was clubs. I'll be honest. You look at say Chelsea, who at that point, and how their fans reacted, probably at the forefront of actually protesting against it. So much of what they're like. Maybe it's purely naive of me to think it, considering that maybe obviously there's going to be, you would imagine, TV. They're not going to be relying on, say, the attendances and all the rest of it. But the nature of how across Europe it did seem to be totally, it seemed to be from the outside. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe it was different when you look at, say, maybe Barcelona and some Real Madrid fans actually, because of more so Barcelona, realize what's actually going on with their own club and how far they are falling behind. But the nature of how it was totally just fans seem to be absolutely disgusted by it, and the nature of the protests, like that, that's not going to go away, even if, like, you know what I mean? Like, that will, I think, maintain. And it's those fans who are on the ground. It's those fans who will actually be going to games.
Yeah.
Because it's not as if they'll be able to fill stadiums purely with tourists. They just won't be able to.
But that's an interesting thing itself. So the resistance in Spain and Italy was so much lessened. And it's interesting. So I've been told as well, basically, when it broke up, people within UEFA basically realized they needed to get people in England on side, because they realized that other than Germany, who weren't really involved because Bayern and Dortmund rejected it, that most of the resistance is going to come from England, which is exactly what happened. And it does make me think, especially now, given the fallout, given it's at the very least temporarily harder for these clubs, for the English clubs to go into the Super League. I would say, if it actually happens and this court case develops in this way, which is still a few years off, I would say that any future Super League would be a Central European Super League with, say, the big ones involved: Barca, Juventus, Real Madrid. And I wouldn't be surprised if they basically latch on to, because this is what they're trying to do at the moment, which is persuade massive clubs from medium tier countries. So basically, you're talking Celtic, Ajax, Porto, Benfica, all these clubs that have a huge European pedigree, but basically because they're in elite, they're in countries that are too small to sustain a big TV market, means they're in this kind of weird situation where they're too big for their own country, but not big enough for the Champions League. And that's what they could target. And that's what I think that there is.
Even that would just be, that would just lose the whole point of it. Then it's not a Super League, is it?
I know, but I suppose the point would be then that starts to generate momentum. And then suddenly, because what would European football be? It would basically be a Premier League on one side, this Super League on another. And then I suppose it's about who wins that. Because then I think the calculation they would make, that would get so big that then everyone else would have to follow in. Again, we're talking speculatively at the moment, but this is the way, from speaking to people involved, this is the way kind of some of this is beginning to kind of start to, like, small pieces are beginning to put in place.
Yeah, there's a lot of hypotheticals there, obviously, that we're talking about. But on the other side of it, David, I suppose it does throw into sharp relief, like, our own league here as well. And as we've seen with our involvement in European competitions, but also even the amount of prize money, we're talking like 1 million here, 3 million there for getting into a UEFA Conference League group stages. And the money we're talking about, obviously, if in some prospective Super League in the future, or even what Premier League clubs get through broadcast revenues, it just pales in comparison.
Yeah, and I suppose if you consider the fact that St. Patrick's Athletic could end up possibly playing Manchester United in Europe, that just probably shows you why Manchester United were so keen to be involved in the Super League, I suppose. Like, we literally earlier on, obviously, before you came on again, literally talking about, obviously, here we're still talking about not even clubs who don't want to pay 52-week contracts, don't want to play lads in pre-season. But, like, I don't know. It's very fractured. Everything just seems very at the top level is very fractured. But then even look at what needs to happen with the League of Ireland. It's basic stuff. That's the It's so. I don't know. I think we're talking about, like, Jesus, it's Monday morning, but I'm already depressed.
Yeah, but even that. I mean, what we're saying about that point you referenced there, Raf, about kind of English football hollowing out the rest of Europe. I mean, in some ways, really, actually. Ireland was almost a test case of this, because being so, and again, this isn't to excuse bigger questions within Ireland that can still be rectified regardless, but being so close to the English, I mean, Irish football, basically, one of the most influential moments in its history was when people could watch English football on TV from the late 60s. I think there is, if you actually look at it, the correlation that suddenly brought a massive drop in attendances, and so much follows from that. And when you have a huge proportion of your audience solely interested in the bigger, more glamorous league over there, obviously affects everything within. And now this is happening right across Europe, where because it's not even about English football really anymore. It's about 10 to 12 super glamorous clubs that dominate so much of social media, dominate so much TV. It's really hard for anyone else to kind of fight for their space, and that does create trickle down problems then, because they don't have the same money. They're all fighting for money now, and that's where kind of suppose an element of dysfunction comes into it as well. But as David says there, that shouldn't excuse, basic decisions.
Yeah, I suppose the final point before we wrap up, I suppose the tenure of your piece was, I suppose, is it too big to fail? And is there anything in the future? And it's obviously you don't wish it to fail, because I think we all enjoy the Premier League, and certainly I enjoy all the kind of other leagues that are there, whether it's our own one, La Liga, Serie A, whatever it is. I think it's the kind of the multitude of everything that makes it enjoyable. But is it too big to fail, or is there anything in the future that maybe threatens it? Because I know you mentioned some of the the changes in the in broadcasting, streaming coming in, and then the different platforms that are there, that maybe the Premier League has actually been kind of slow to react to some of those.
Well, I mean, I completely agree. I think that's one of the, as great as modern football is in terms of what you see on the pitch, and as good, and even City would be an illustration of that. To me, it's one of the shames is that if all of it is so concentrated, that we don't have that kind of that variety that we used to, where it was more equal across continents, and there was kind of more beauty in more areas, or more elements of top level football matter, more kind of intrigue to it. I suppose the potential European Super League is a threat to the Premier League. The British economic and political climate is a threat to it. But really, what it actually comes down to is, I suppose it's a quite simple equation. The Premier League's strength is based on its immense broadcasting revenue. So the biggest threat is whether that broadcasting revenue is affected. Now, for the moment, that doesn't look to be the case, but we are seeing huge changes in the broadcast climate, which is basically, I mean, the football broadcasting model is based on structures from 30 years ago, which is basically national licenses. And that's happened. That's still, and that's how the Premier League generates so much money, because they sell, they sell their rights to individual broadcasters in each country or each market. Whereas that's now in a world where media is kind of increasingly globalized, where people want kind of instant streams, and that's going to present the challenge. Now, you do have to innovate to keep ahead, but this is the issue, I suppose, when something is so open in this way, that it's much more difficult to innovate, and specifically for the Premier League to actually vote on innovations when you're earning that much money, because no one wants to risk undermining what they've got. And that means other leagues, so this is what you've heard, like so Spain are actually being really creative now, and what next? And they've got like entire teams that voted to kind of look into this. And then for a good few years, we think, oh, that's not going to make any effect. And then suddenly, like what happened to the Premier League in the 90s, all of a sudden there's a switch, and one potential area of broadcasting, whatever, is more influential than another. And then one league is suddenly, they've got years of a head start. And that's when things can actually, unfold quite rapidly. And of course, the same happened to Serie A. I mean, let's be, like, in the mid to late 90s, no one would have thought that Serie A could have that its era dominance could have crumbled in the way it did. But yeah, here we are 30 years on, and Serie A, okay, it is actually having a slight resurgence, but it's been a bit of a joke for the last 15 years. And this is Italy, the great, like one of the great football cultures. So I suppose, yeah, it's why even the Premier League and even all this product and all this money, they can't get too complacent either.
Yeah, and I suppose one final point on that as well, I think maybe the advantage the Premier League has, I think you referenced it in your piece as well, is obviously it being part of the Anglo sphere. Obviously that opens it up to the US market, and also globally, given just the preponderance of the English language in comparison to any other language. Maybe Spanish maybe comes a little bit closer to it, but the fact that globally I think English is sort of like the language du jour, that sort of that does give it a sort of that extra bit of advantage that maybe Serie A and Italian wouldn't necessarily have.
And even that perspective, I mean, Spain used to dominate Latin America, especially I suppose this is always shown with the way Ronaldo always wanted to go to Real Madrid, Luis Suarez always wanted to go to one of Barcelona, Real Madrid. Whereas now, even I remember, like, when I was like being half Spanish and we go to Spain every summer, 25 years ago, very few people could speak English. Now, as is the case across the world, all the young people speak English, which only kind of strengthens that cultural framework for the Premier League.
Yeah, which is frustrating, because anytime I want to practice my Spanish, they come back with English. Yeah. It's like, well, I'll have to just stick with the one language instead of the other couple of ones that I've learned. But anyway, Miguel Delaney, thanks a million for taking the time, and also David Snade, thanks for coming on this week.
No bother.